Sebastian Schutz, I pick up the call. I don't know anything about him except that he is a German attorney. And I introduced myself and I said I'm taking over the case from both Paul and Marc. It took me about a week to consider whether or not I'm interested to join the firm with such a wonderful welcome with 10 German boxes, and I don't speak German. I do speak 5 other languages. Luckily, I had an attorney, her name is Tali, also Israeli. She said, I'll take care of all the paperwork. You do the talking with various people. So I talked to Sebastian. It turns out he speaks Hebrew perfectly, better than myself. And he goes to Israel often. Why is that? Because he grew up in Israel as the son of the German ambassador in Israel. So he speaks Hebrew, he curses in Hebrew, he is German. And he tells me that he's going to send me an email and a fax, all whatever he requires to pursue pretty much the same claims that Paul told you, but in Germany. And he sends me a list to make it, to summarize what it is. It's about 140 documents that have to be apostolized. Apostolization is some kind of international procedure where there is a treaty between the nations, whatever treaty there is, England, Israel, Canada, and you take a birth certificate, death certificate, marriage certificate, and you apostolize it by going to the Secretary of State and by going to the court. And sometimes, like Germany, they also want you to go to the State Department in Washington. So every document, birth certificate, death certificate, change of name, has to be apostolized for each and every one of the heirs existing and living today. And you have to show the connection between those people. Some of them, they're 90 years old, some of them are their children, and their parents passed away. You have to actually prove the connection between those who passed away, and you have to do that through probate department or administration, depending where they are and which nation they are. So I get this wonderful request letter, which is 3 pages, and I'm debating whether I should do it or not. Time is passing. It's been now a year past since Paul last spoke to the attorneys for Dresdner Bank, and people are getting discouraged a little bit. What are our chances, really? Really, what are the chances of recovering something after 65 years? And no less recovering something from East Germany under the influence of the Soviet Union. So I spoke to, we immediately bond, Sebastian and myself. We speak in Hebrew, we spoke about, and we talk almost daily. And meanwhile, Ronnie, who is now our client, who took over under the will that Marc drafted for Mr. Nacher, who passed away, Ronnie turned out to be Israeli as well. Wonderful. I feel now much more comfortable. I'm surrounded with people that speak Hebrew, and my assistant speaks Hebrew. And he comes from Toronto, he flies to New York, we meet, we develop a plan how to go about obtaining all those documents. But our biggest battle really is, and that has nothing to do with anything legal work, our biggest battle is to convince 90 years old people to persuade them to sign a power of attorney to a German attorney or any other stranger, knowing that they lost all those properties, their grandparents and their great uncles. How do we do that? I mean, they'll think that I'm crazy coming out of the blue. Now, Ronnie flies from Toronto, he's the executor. He comes from Toronto, and we decide, I ask him, does he know anyone from all those pool of heirs that settled some of the claim in 1955 in West Germany? There was some compensation, for properties, not properties, for shares that were given by the Engelhardt Brewery. That's the name of the company that took over some of the properties in West Germany. So I asked him, do you know anyone at all? And he happens to know one lady who turns out to be related to him. So we first talked to her. She knows two other people. He introduces himself as a family member, and they talk about an hour. She refers us to two other cousins, and slowly, weeks and months passes, we're starting to gain the confidence of all the heirs. Now we're talking London, Israel, Florida, California, Toronto, and Germany. We have to go to all those places, meet them, convince them, persuade them to sign documents, give them hope that there is chance. And that wasn't easy. Even my partners, my associates would tell me, I'll believe it when I see it. And they were the litigators. I believe that we will be victorious. Now, although they needed all the documentation of all the heirs, the courts in Germany wanted to know that this is not just a case where someone says, my grandparents owned property in Germany. We actually had to prove to the court very legitimately by any notarization had to be in the German consulate, whether it's California, whether it's Florida, it doesn't matter. Whether it's in Canada, any will, any death certificate had to be apostolized and approved by the German consulate, whatever the nation. What I learned is that legal skills were not necessary at all. What was necessary is to listen to those people. They just were desperate to talk. And so once I introduced myself or they heard about me from other heirs, I just listened to their story or their family's story. What I learned is that really they're not interested in how much I know. They were interested to see if I'm willing to listen to them. And the more I listened to them, the more we became friendly. It took a couple of years. Eventually, Sebastian came here, we met him, we took him to dinner, wonderful, wonderful guy. I mean, classy in every way you can imagine, and very handsome, very good looking. We became very good friends. Ronnie came, that's the Israeli, actually is now our client. And we decided that we're gonna go to Germany, all of us, all three of us. And in Germany, there were many procedural battles, but the main battles were three. One of them Paul mentioned, which were actually mentioned two of them. One was to avoid the defense of the statute of limitation, but that was very easy in Germany. Nobody even made the court immediately accepted it. The statute of limitations didn't start to run until both Germanies unified. Once they unified, if we didn't do anything, then the statute starts to run. Then there was the issue of the release. In 1955, many of the heirs, at that time there were much more people alive, many of the heirs settled for some very minor compensation. So the company that was our adversary, Engelhardt Brewery, that merged with Brown Boer, that's another giant brewery, they said, you already got your money. How many times do you want us to pay you? And our argument was that what you pay was simply for property in West Germany and not for all the real estate. And we're talking about 150, 160 pieces of land, or actually buildings that used to be buildings that belonged to Ignaz Nacher. And the court accepted our position that nothing can apply to East Germany. That was our second battle. The third battle, which was, Sebastian said, was the most difficult one, Engelhard Brewery said, okay, fine, we'll recompensate the heirs again once you prove who they are and you prove the connection, but we're going to compensate them with shares from the corporation. Sebastian didn't agree to it. I had nothing to do with this battle. Sebastian said, no, we don't want your shares because, as you all know, shares can be manipulated by making subdivisions or making different class of shares. We wanted the value to go directly and to be shared directly by the heirs individually. Nothing to do by, we didn't want corporate shares. If we accepted corporate shares, the shares could be reduced in value immediately by a meeting of the board of directors, and they would do it. It went to the Supreme Court, and Sebastian won. The court decided that there will be a direct compensation to the individual heirs once the paperwork and the proof is completed. So statutorily, the government of Germany created, as a result of our case and some similar cases with Israeli survivors, the government established by statute the equivalent of a building department in major cities of East Germany, former East Germany. And their sole duty was to ascertain the existence of deeds from 1939 and whether or not they belong to Ignaz Nacher. That necessitated us, Ronnie Mandowski from Canada, and Sebastian and myself, to actually go to at least 22 cities in East Germany, identify the properties and the meets and bounds, and there were like 153. Then we hired some surveyors to do the work for us because it was exhausting, and it was also very sad to see what happened to those buildings. There are some pictures. They were majestic, beautiful, magnificent, and now they were all broken and really totally neglected and abandoned. But we went to each and every major center, and we went to the LAROFs, to the building department, to actually identify the parcels and the deeds. And they welcomed us pretty nice. Sebastian introduced Ronnie and myself as Israeli military men, and he said the reason he did that is as if Israel was having a claim, which they didn't. Although later on, Israel was promised 2 submarines, which Israel is about to receive any day now from Germany. But Paul will tell you how that enters the picture. So the Sebastian victory against Engelhard Brewery and the Supreme Court of Germany, which was ironic, we winning in the German Supreme Court, was unbelievable. 2 years before, some attorneys from Queens just going to Germany and claiming something, but that was becoming a real something that nobody believed, and it was becoming real. Even when I talk about it, and when I met the directors were under instructions to welcome us and be very patient with us and not be bureaucratic like a clerks in the car, like they're doing you a favor. They welcome us, they serve us coffee. It was like it was happening in Twilight Zone.